perhaps we better start off, if you'd like to just say who you are, a little bit about your family maybe, and what you're doing now in the UK.
I'm Nathanael Somanathan. I'm from Sri Lanka. And I come from a pastor's family. I grew up as a Christian. My parents were converts, but I grew up in a Christian pastor's household. And I have two sisters. I'm currently married. My beautiful wife, her name is Skylar. I came to the UK in order to pursue my PhD. And so my research work pertains to theological anthropology, looking at the human person from an Eastern perspective. And so that's currently what I'm doing here at the University of Birmingham.
Great, thanks, Nathan. Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting area of study. We've heard about what's happening in Sri Lanka. It seems to be different updates kind of every day. I don't know if you just want to share your personal perspective on what's been happening over there.
Yeah, so as you might already know, we are going through the worst economic crisis in our history. Not just in my recent memory, but even for my parents, this has been the worst kind of situation economically that they've faced. And mind you, they've been through a 30-year civil war that ended just over a decade ago. And even though things were really bad then, it was not this bad in terms of the economy. And so what you see on a day-to-day basis right now is hours long of queues or lines for fuel and for food and for medical supplies and for medical aid, and almost virtually every sector has been overwhelmed, and there's a lack of resources because the country is basically run out of money, essentially, that our foreign reserves have been depleted, and therefore the economic crisis has led also to a political crisis, or you could say the other way around, that the political crisis in the first place led to the economic crisis. So from my perspective, what I see, and I'm a Tamil person, which is a minority community within Sri Lanka, and as Tamils, we've been through very hard times, especially during the war. We went through a very difficult time, and we've been treated as second-class citizens many times, have experienced discrimination. But in this particular situation, or this economic crisis, it really did bring everyone together in a sense, because we all felt the pain of it. And especially, I'm not there on the ground, but I can speak for my family and my church and others, that there is a sense in which everyone realized that there's a sense in which we are all in this together, and they were able to identify that there was a political rot at the center of this that needs to be dealt with. And that's where we see that, I mean, you might have heard on the news that Sri Lanka was pretty much governed by a dynasty, a family, for many years. First the brother, and then his brother, and then various family members in important governmental positions, and holding very high level of power. So there was a consolidation of power within one family. And because of the corruption within that family and their cronies who were in on some of the scams and and were responsible for the mishandling of resources, which was then amplified during COVID, we saw that the country essentially plunged into the worst sort of crisis.
It is really helpful because you're sort of providing a bit more background, which is really helpful.
Yes.
Are your studies at all able to kind of speak into the situation that's happening in Sri Lanka?
Yes, I mean, my studies, in the sense, I mean, my interest is looking at the human person from an Eastern perspective, has many implications for interreligious dialogue, for instance, which is a huge issue in Sri Lanka. As I said, we do have a history of discrimination between ethnicities and religion. So Christianity is a minority community and has faced a lot of resistance. But there's also been hostility from the Christian side towards other faiths as well, not really knowing how to dialogue sometimes, or how to engage them apart from just evangelism or conversion. So in that sense, I do see my work trying to find a way in which we can go beyond theological work that is restricted within the four walls of the church, but can have implication for the existential challenges we face in Sri Lanka, which is how do we exist as a minority community in this country, and how do we find fresh avenues for peace and coexistence and human flourishing, that we can draw resources from, not just from the Christian tradition, but other traditions as well.
Yeah, and let's hope and pray that down the line your studies will have a big impact back there. I was just thinking about what you said earlier about the fact that really it's the leadership that have been corrupt. I think you mentioned the word corruption, didn't you, and about this sort of dynasty.
Yeah.
Can you see how, is there a way in which maybe the church in Sri Lanka can kind of impact, society, or the way that politics is working? Do you want to maybe sort of talk about that a bit?
Yeah, and I do think I do think the church has a huge role to play, especially in this crisis. And there have been instances where the church has been that sort of beacon of light and hope, and but also a prophetic voice, and speaking truth to power. So we've had few instances where the church, the priests of the church, or the different kinds of Christian traditions have been in the front lines of the protest, asking for change, and being for the country, being good citizens, and saying that we care about the city of man as much as we are longing for the city of God. And so in that way, I think the church has always been keen and also very diligent about speaking truth to power, and not pandering, or not trying to somehow somehow use the political system in order to gain power or status. And so the Sri Lankan church is a good example for that. Obviously, there are different theologies of political engagement, and therefore different expressions of how people have participated in this protest and in this resistance. Again, something I don't know if I mentioned is that the current president has stepped down after much struggle and after much resistance, that he has stepped down, but it was only accomplished through the protest movement by the people. Not the opposition party, nothing political, nothing that came from within the political system. This was basically people coming onto the streets and taking and exercising their rights in order to request the government to be changed. And so the church has been part of that response. And also has brought this, and like, for instance, my church went out there as well, and we had boards with passages written on it, basically trying to testify to the to the people who are not Christian, or the unbelievers there, to show how much God is for justice and for God is for the oppressed and the weak and the poor amongst us, and that he cares about this situation. So there has been that testimony and that witness there as well. And so I think the church has done it, and it continues to do that. And I think the church in Sri Lanka, especially in this time and in the months and years to come, will be the voice, can be a voice of hope as well, for recovery, for change. Because even though the president has changed over, there's still lots of urgent challenges right now. And there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of trauma, and there's lots of other things. And I think the Christian church has amazing resources to address those basic needs.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for sharing all that. The next question I was going to ask was about how we as kind of Langham supporters can pray for you and for your family and for Sri Lanka. I guess you've already touched on things we can pray for, about the church being a prophetic voice and about bringing hope. But are there any other points that you want to specifically bring up that we can share with supporters?
Yeah, so we still have some way ahead. I mean, there's still a lot to be done in terms of recovering from the situation, at least to attain some sort of stability. And so next week there is the kind of sort of a parliamentary election in order to appoint an interim government with an interim president and prime minister. And there's a lot of political games going on and uncertainty. And so we want continual prayer in order for the Sri Lankan political system to stabilize, and also for the people's protest to bear good fruit, that it will not be in vain, that there's actually been people who have died also in these protests due to clashes with the army and such. So there's a lot of pain and trauma there, and so to be able to deal with that. And secondly, of course, I've already, like you mentioned, we want economic revitalization and help that we don't know where it'll come from. The IMF is involved. But also for God's miraculous provision in a way that people, especially the poor in Sri Lanka, will not come to a place where they have to starve or anything like that. And so some form of economic revitalization scheme or program to take effect, especially with IMF, if that to go forward. And thirdly, I think just for the churches to continue to be that conduit of that message of hope, and also that prophetic voice, that there will be a unity seen among churches in this distress, that we will not mirror the political system, but that we will be an alternative ideal for what leadership looks like, what community looks like, what love looks like, what care looks like, service looks like. And in all these ways, we have a unique opportunity to embody the God we serve. So that would be another thing I think that we pray for. And those are some of the things that are immediately apparent to me.
Yeah, there's so much there. Yep. Thanks so much. Yeah, there's so much we can be praying for, and yeah, I'll definitely be sharing those points with our supporters.
Thanks so much, Victoria,